Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in Northern Ireland, often too much is made of what divides us. But what we do hold in common is a reverence for life, for family and for community. And that's demonstrated by how we remember people in death, displayed in the support for those who grieve, whether it's at the wake, the funeral or the time afterwards. And these are unspoken obligations inherited right down throughout the generations. All of us who made the decisions and set the rules knew that the regulations on wakes and funerals would be the limits on life that would cut the deepest, that would ask the most of those at their lowest moment and frustrate the most basic human response to console the grieving. It is to the immense credit of the bereaved and their families and communities right across all of Northern Ireland that the most difficult limit on our lives was abided by throughout the pandemic by the vast majority. They bore a heavier burden than us. They protected us. They acted in the common good. The credit they deserve is only matched by the shame that Sinn Féin should feel for their actions last June. I take nothing away from the grieving family on that occasion. For Sinn Féin, however, they chose to act in a way that breached the regulations on funerals at that time, and in so doing happily sent a signal to everyone else in Northern Ireland that it was one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us. The actions of senior Sinn Féin representatives, the Sinn Féin Deputy First Minister, their executive ministers, Sinn Féin members of the Northern Ireland Policing Board, sparked the political crisis. And once again, the message from Sinn Féin was clear: ourselves alone, ourselves first, regardless of the cost of undermining the public health messaging. The wake, the funeral procession of thousands, the political rally were clear and premeditated breaches of the COVID regulations. The prioritisation at Roselawn over other grieving families was hurtful, ignorant and callous in the extreme. Acts of arrogance, acts of self-entitlement, acts of privilege. Sinn Féin calls for equality, respect and integrity, but actually demonstrates the opposite. When someone believes that they are above the law, where clear and premeditated breaches of COVID regulations were made, it has to be said that there is a rightful expectation of everyone that the police and the justice system shows that they are not above the law. And what adds insult to injury is that that rightful expectation has been failed. Sadly, the police abdicated its responsibilities before the funeral, at the funeral and since the funeral. Decisions not to gather evidence, collaboration and knowledge of the plan of breaking regulations facilitated the breaches of thousands, foot-dragging on the investigation. And now individually all of those are unacceptable, but collectively they show that something is very much wrong. Much work will be required to rebuild levels of confidence within the community of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and that really does concern me, because it's the failure of the PSNI command that has become a primary justification for the PPS refusal to prosecute, allied with the absurdity from the PPS that ignorance of the law is a defence in general. The Northern Ireland public were not confused about the law, and yet we are asked to believe that those who enacted the laws were confused.
Will the member give way?
Yes, I will give way.
Can I ask the member, the First Minister, if she was at any point confused by the regulations, and if it's credible for people to say that they were confused by the regulations whenever they were involved in the drafting and passing of that legislation?
The member has an additional minute.
Well, I wasn't confused about the regulations. We had many discussions on policy. We took advice from our Chief Medical Officer, from our Chief Scientific Advisor, and let me say there are many funerals I should have been at, but I wasn't at. I wasn't at. Many will say that Sinn Féin has no sense of shame. That may very well be true, but cannot be the way forward. Today, it is important that we start the journey forward with a common rejection of different rules and laws for different groups of people. For our part, we hold strong to the cherished ideal that all citizens are equal under the law and equally subject to the law. If we are to build a better society for all, it must be fair for all. We must unite around this principle if we are to do what is right. No exceptions, no special favours for Sinn Fein or anyone else. And while the Deputy First Minister and the Finance Minister and their colleagues have tried to justify their behaviour and excuse their elitist attitudes to everything that has happened, we cannot tread that path. So today, in closing, Mr. Speaker, I, my party, stand with those families who sacrificed so much, so very, very much, for the common good of Northern Ireland. The battle to defend and protect the principle of equality before the law is more intense than ever, but it is a cause we must win for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.